Hi, my name is Miriam Lauba, and I am the senior producer for the Play On podcast series at Next Chapter Podcasts. I am delighted to have as my guest today the unbelievably talented, self-described Shakespeare nerd, Daniel Jose Molina. Dan's work has been seen on Broadway, in Fish in the Dark, off-Broadway in a play called Terra Firma. He has spent 5 seasons with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, 3 seasons at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. He has also worked at Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival and at the American Players Theater in Wisconsin. At such a young age, Dan has racked up an impressive number of Shakespeare roles, including Prince Hal in Henry IV, Parts 1 and 2, the title role in Henry V, Romeo, Petruchio, Ferdinand, Malcolm, Posthumus, Pericles, and Edgar. Dan and I spent time together at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and he is one of my all-time favorites to watch on stage. I also consider him a dear friend. So welcome, fellow Shakespeare nerd, to our bonus content interview.
Wow, what a welcome. You forgot president and chief of the Miriam Lauba fan club.
Oh, how very sweet.
I also love your work. That's so kind of you. Thank you so much. But yeah, Shakespeare nerd for sure.
Well, we're going to get to that. But before we get to that, can you tell me, Dan, just tell me where you were born?
Yeah, I was born in Santo Domingo, which is the capital city of Dominican Republic. And I moved to the States when I was 11. My parents separated and my mom moved us to Maryland. So kind of DMV area is where I went to middle school and high school. And then I graduated and went to school in Georgia. And after that, it's been a regional Shakespeare. That's nonstop. Thankfully, I'm very, very grateful.
Do you, I don't think I've ever asked you this, but was Spanish your first language or English, or did you learn them simultaneously?
Spanish was the first language. Thankfully, my parents put me in a school that had a strong bilingual focus. So I took a lot of English classes there, but of course, growing up in the DR, there was very, very little actual practical. We didn't speak in English conversationally, but it's something that I think kind of happens all over the world. And especially to me, which is that movies had such an impact on me and just kind of American media. I remember the day my dad got satellite television, that was we didn't leave the living room for a week. It was we were getting it all streamed in. So I've always been obsessed with movies and stuff, and that all, wanting to.
What are your favorites? What was the first one you remember watching as your favorite? And what are the ones that stick out to you?
Generally the movies of the 70s, but very specifically the Spielberg, Lucas worlds are my religion. Where that's the joke I've always said is Harrison Ford actually was the one who taught me how to speak English. And
that's good.
He had such a huge impact on me. But and that was actually my first big love. I fell into acting by accident. I really wanted to go to school for film. But yeah, that's another story. But yeah, those are to me
your
favorite
films.
Yeah.
Do you dream in English or Spanish?
I think in English, I do. It depends who's speaking to me because I don't even keep track of it anymore. And my mother's Puerto Rican, so I would actually say Spanglish is the main focus that we have. And it really is I can't keep track of the context or whatever, but we're always switching in between the two. I would say it depends on who is speaking to me, but usually more English, I would say.
Okay, very interesting. But depending on who comes to you in the dream is actually
right.
You respond in kind. I don't know the story about you wanting to go to school for film and then ended up in the theater. Mm-hmm. Tell me that story because I don't know it.
Yeah, I was a very proud, snobby, dumb high school kid. And I told myself, I'm either going to go to school for film and USC, UCLA, or NYU. And if I don't go into those, then it's not meant to be. And I'm not, like stupid kids think. So I had no backups aside from those. And I didn't get in because for any number of reasons. But my mom was actually the one who really saw that my focus really improved when it was something that I was passionate about, when it was something that really connected with me. She always knew that I was going to kind of have to work in a field of my passion.
Right.
And she saw that I was having so much fun doing a couple plays in high school, and she was like, I don't think that you're a terrible actor. Why don't you? That's actually how she said it to me. It wasn't like, I love it, you're so talented. It was like, other people seem to like what you do, and she was the one who encouraged me to audition for some schools. And I did, and I started getting some positive feedback, which I hadn't really felt before in any other arts that I was involved in. And I heard back from this great school called Savannah College of Art and Design, and they gave me a great scholarship. So they're in Savannah, Georgia, and that's where I ended up going, and the rest is history.
At Savannah, Georgia, you were studying theater. Can you say a little bit about when you first came into contact with old William Shakespeare's work?
Read it first, for sure. And I think like everyone did, like in 8th grade and then going into high school, and had very much the idea of like, neat. Like I remember liking the stories and the characters, but like people don't do that for a living. Like that's a scholastic thing. Like they don't, and I didn't really have an understanding that classical theaters are able to work in that world. And it's this real kind of tradition. Sounds like, ugh. No, it's a world that we all get to share in and able to dive in completely different aspects that I really fell in love with that idea. It was in college, and it was from a professor that I had a freshman year, Professor Lawrence Ballard, who was fantastic. He was a big Seattle actor, had worked for several years at OSF. He was the first one that told me about OSF. And he really opened that world to me, that it wasn't, I even had the preconceived notion of like, right, but when people do Shakespeare plays, it's still very much for the idea of tradition. Let's, it's the pumpkin pants and the ruffs. And that wasn't very interesting to me. I had no idea how many different ways these stories can be interpreted, which is a big passion of mine now. But it was really through him. And it was through his advice. He was like, Daniel, you can't sing and you can't dance. So he was Shakespeare. And it was, hurtful, but also very, very good advice in how practical it was of, here is this world of theater that these plays will always be getting produced by new people. It's just something that you should be familiar with. And then thankfully it was also something that I really, really enjoyed and was passionate about.
What was the first one that you were actually drawn to and you were like, oh, I get it?
The Henrys, no doubt. All of the sixes and the fours more. But the idea of really looking at, and I mean, the Greeks did it, but Shakespeare did it better. The idea of like a theater saga of these same characters and stories that span several plays was so cool to me. The idea of, and looking up and seeing that theaters were able to do the entire Henriade and stuff, and are able to follow on that journey that spanned, several plays over several years sometimes, was so cool to me. And actors getting to live with characters for like, when big stars do like movie franchises or whatever, and they come back for the sequels and whatever, that was really, really cool to me in that aspect. But also those stories to me, I don't know, it's just a mix of his language and character and plot. For my taste, he just strikes a balance there, as well as like several very specific things of those stories just melt me, just like really, really speak to me. I love
what are they? What are the ones what speaks to you from those? What are the themes that speak to you from Henry IV and V?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely about leadership. That's a big one in terms of what does it mean to be a great man? Is it right for someone to yearn for power? If someone yearns for power, does that kind of, disqualify them from being worthy of it? It's that, and also too, like, that's very idealistic way of looking at it, no, I don't want the power. And no, don't you see that means that you are the right man for the, that kind of stuff. Right. I love Henry V. Very, very, with all of its problematic baggage in a modern sense of it, it can be interpreted as very jingoistic propaganda. I don't think it's necessarily that. Is it pro-war? Is it anti-war? I think it is all of those things, and is so timeless for that. I'm also like a dumb boy who loves like war movies and loves, you know, seeing the theme of like you know, the camaraderie that is born out of men being in the trenches, and the play does that so well, but even takes it to a further extent of this is a king who's already had to struggle with all those things of not really wanting to be a monarch, a god chosen leader, but has to be, but then discovers his real person, and you know, when he's in the field with his troops. It's all those things I really speak to me, and it's a play that I've, you know, when I see it I very much enjoy it, and performing it I felt like people really go along with that story, really like that play. I love that play. But then I mean, some, you know, Richard II, very different tone, but also just as beautiful, maybe some of his best poetry, literally just speaking of the sounds of his words that he puts together is just awe-inspiring. And I mean, of the classics, the hits, the Romeo and Juliet, the Hamlet, the Mackers is done every other day at a new theater. Those I also very much love. But if the ones that like like mine, are the, I would say the Henriette for sure. Did you work on that with Larry Ballard back in college? Were the Henry IVs ones that you worked at with Larry Ballard? No, I actually only got to do one play of Shakespeare's when I was in college, and I got to be the Scottish king. Okay. Very intimidating. That was back when I was believably, you know, even unbelievably even skinnier, and like so it was very fun to look at pictures and stuff. I'm like, yes, very intimidating. That general, yeah. But that was like my first time getting to do one of his plays for an audience. What is the physical experience of performing Shakespeare's words? Could you describe that? Yes, it's now starting out, obviously, to doing your first one in an academic setting too. You're not just working with a director, you're also working with your mentor, your teacher. So the lessons of hopefully how to perform this language was extending to far beyond what we were working on in the play. And I had a little bit of a hard time then figuring out, well, what is correct? I only saw it as like a one-way street. I'm going to make progress at learning this new skill of performing classical text, and then I will be as good as I can be, rather than, no, people will have different opinions. And I have seen, you know, so many differing styles, not just from actor, but theaters have different tastes. I really sometimes wonder of how different I sounded then trying to get through verse than I do now. But the feeling that I had from it then, that excited me then, that I think still excites me now, are those moments when, just because it is verse and poetry, it still sounds like it is generating out of a real human soul, rather than a stylistic high poetry. What is I was sometimes taught by people I disagree with now, that because these are larger than this is larger than life poetry, this is heightened poetry, that means that the characters must also be heightened as well. I don't think that that's true. I think that all those things can live at once, a person's idiosyncrasies and being a real human being while having this heightened poetry. I actually think that contradiction is what makes it so juicy. That's a beautiful way to describe it, the contradiction. Do you have like a line from Henry V that you could do for us in both ways? You could do sort of in a way that you don't believe and a way that you love? Oh man. Well, it's once more. You could even do it with something very, very big and generalize, you know, and it would, I can even see when you break down the scansion or whatever, like in the playing Shakespeare, you see that's actually one that they use. And, you know, it would be, you know, once more, unto the breach, dear friends, once more, close the wall up with our English dead. And it has this like feeling of very in control and gallopy and honoring the verse very well. And that's like very cool. Great. We get it. Now it is adding on the layer, especially dealing with something like Henry V, which is the realities of war. Yeah. That I feel like we can take those moments to be like, you know, once more, onto the breach, dear friend, once more, or close the wall, that we can, it's not breaking it up. It's finding those other little intentions. I think when I hear, and I had kind of, when I was just doing it now before, in the more classical sense of like when Olivier did it, it was more for the pageantry. It was more for it's not for us to feel the real combat of that situation. It's to hear this incredible bit of poetry, the text, which should be a character. But I think that there's something about it in those days where it was heightened so far that we lose the characters and the settings of everything that they're going through. And that it took center stage, where I think that it can all live a little bit more equally. And I mean, of course, tastes change over time, and it has been changing forever. So
right. So the way we do it now may be different from the way we do it 10 years from now, even.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about the experience? Because at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, you did get to do Prince Hal and Henry V, basically the Star Wars of Shakespeare. You got to do the Star Wars of Shakespeare. So what was it like doing all three of those, to get to carry that? And what did you learn? What was it like to do those roles? And you did them for a long time, right? You did them over the course of a year. So what was it like living with Henry IV for a year and then moving on and living with Henry V for a year? And what did you learn? And what did you take away from that experience?
A big takeaway was even before of what the play itself taught me. OSF is incredible because of the experience that we get to get there as actors, of not just, it's not a 2-month run, it's not a 3-month run. If you're doing the longer Shakespeare's, it is a 9-month run of doing these performances. And in that time, you will find, what are your limits? What are your weaknesses? What are your tricks? Hopefully, if you're doing enough self-reflection once you're open, what are those habits that you go to when you feel unsafe, but are also the things that are holding you back? And that I have like a very specific moment. It's actually the scene where Hal meets his dad, not meets his dad, but confronts his dad for the first time. And it happens halfway through the play. The entire other first half of the play, they're only talking about each other. And the audience has been waiting for this moment, how the king is going to dress him down. How is he going to list these grievances? But he needs his son, but he doesn't want, so it is a very, very immediate, very modern feeling scene. And many other moments of the play, it feels like we're needing to get in exposition and context and what are the geopolitics. Here's one where like the doors close and it is like disappointed father sees his son and is going to let him know something that very, very relatable and human and small. And we wanted it to feel immediate. And I remember in the very beginning of the run, how pushy I was, how I was trying to get every ounce of everything that I could into this moment when he finally fires back and says, no, I'm going to prove you wrong, Dad. I'm going to do this and this. And I remember I was just it was just a lot. And I knew it didn't feel right. I knew I didn't like switch anything. And it was bothering me. And I remember like, what if it's the opposite? It's not that I switch into action and I need to show everyone how much I'm going to do it. What if the more powerful thing is to just be very unlike Hal and say it as plainly, as honestly as I can, and ground yourself and use that stillness with the language as plainly as I can, not try to rile everyone up in the audience by like, that idea of like, protest too much. Yeah. That then shows the insecurity rather than maybe show them a glimpse of the kind of person that Henry V is, which is the eerie, grounded focus. On the inside, it's a mess. Yeah. But the moment where he's able to say F you in a very confident, grounded way. And that's when I figured that's way better, because that's the actual complete opposite of all the ribaldry and crazy energy that we had in the first act. So it was those things of like, sometimes to create that like moment that you want in a something like something needs to happen here, actually sometimes taking it to zero and doing way less is a good thing, which is really just had to do with me trusting myself and knowing that speaking it is enough, speaking it very, very honestly in a grounded way. So that's like a very specific moment of a lesson that I found. But throughout doing those plays, it was really about like trusting myself, trusting that you have the instincts that you have for a reason, explore, have, put them aside, but at least know why they were your instincts in the first place. And more often than not, I feel like we find ourselves coming back to some version of it.
Yeah.
If we have a director that we get along with.
Yeah. Yes.
And sometimes you give up, it's also compromise. You give up this aspect of it to be able to get, this other thing that you want. But I think that in doing the Henrys, I feel like I came into my own of like I do sometimes know what I'm talking about, and I like my ideas, and I think that they have a right to be explored in the room, where before than that I think I was a little bit more of a people pleaser. I didn't, what do you want? I'll give you this, that, this, that, this, where in that one, and it took one for me to like very nerdy passion about of the Henrys to be able to feel that way.
It feels like in some ways you went just describing the process of your discovering of stillness and groundedness was in some ways the journey for you as an actor of like, what, I can stand my ground and actually speak to this because I do believe this so passionately, and I can trust that. I can trust my own words. Sounds like in some ways you as an actor went through a similar journey that Hal goes through just in terms of confidence.
Oh, 100%. That was another moment that set me free too, was like my in with Hal, especially in Henry V, is he is faking it until he makes it. Right. It is not that he has actually, people do not change fundamentally who they are, which I believe that Henry V is Hal. That is who he is in his soul, because he's not trying to please anyone. He's doing what he genuinely enjoys doing.
Yeah.
Henry V is a performance. Henry V is a character that he is also trying to. So it's, for me, it was this awesome like revelation of like, he's also trying to not mess this up. He's also trying to do, how do I be the best? Just like me, the actor, so daunted by all these other voices and actors that I hear in my head playing this role, which happens a lot in Shakespeare. He is also trying to live up to what he thinks he's supposed to be. Being able to connect with a character's humanity with your own, all the doubts, the fear, the this, will I be? That's a great tool, I think, in an actor's toolbox.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience with Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah. Romeo and Juliet, I had done it several times and I had many other showmances with it before, but the very last time, no, I'm kidding. In 2012, I did it with, at OSF, that was my very first season there, and I did it with Alejandra Escalante as Juliet. And 6 years later, we got married. It's happened before, like so many other couples. It's so strange what happens in that play. And even I remember so vividly being like, well, I'm not stupid. I'm not gonna like hook up with Juliet. Like, this is my first job at right at this major theater. I'm not, come on, I was 23. I wasn't like that young and naive. I'd worked several other seasons at festivals, and I knew that's like a line you do not cross. But
you did.
I did. I was single and doing Romeo and Juliet. It's something that happens in that play. I don't get it.
Yes. What do you think does happen? What is it about that language, and what is it about Alejandra?
She's all right. No, it is the language and the story, absolutely. But there is a trust that happens between those two actors. If even they have a completely platonic co-worker relationship while working on that play, it's maybe the best example that you can find of that. Like, it's like a baton that goes, like, sometimes you have those plays, they're not two-handers,
Right.
But the energy is really carried by two actors. The story is really driven by those two people. And sometimes they meet in the middle. I mean, Romeo and Juliet only have like 3 scenes together, but the rest of it, it's relying on the other person to hopefully keep the energy and the fire going. And I was just blown away by her performance, and just how deft she is as an actor, of like being able to go from one choice to the other, to try new things, to she's incredibly selfless, and really, honestly, like was a kick in the ass for me to try to get to her level. I remember having those thoughts too, of like, oh, I can't let her like run away with it, even though Juliet is a harder part, and she was, you know, just running circles around me. But it's that it hopefully you reach a level of trust, because no one else in that cast knows what you're going through. I mean, the heavy hitters, Tybalt and Mercutio, are in act 1, and then they, you know, screw off, and, you know, they're in the bars by the time with Banish It and all that stuff. So like, they don't really feel that second act hangover that you feel in Romeo and Juliet. It's the nurse and Friar are really like the two other like bigger parts that feel that kind of load, but it's nothing compared to what they go through. And hopefully the magic trick of pulling off the balcony scene, which really buoys the whole, you know, usually productions, these are 2 hours and 45 minutes of Romeo and Juliet. So it's hard. And I felt like we were successful. So really, obviously I fell in love with her as a person eventually, but I just, it was an immediate falling in love with her as an ensemble member, a co-star, a co-worker, a comrade.
Is there a moment in that play that stands out to you? I first of all, I've never heard you describe it, that relationship quite that way. That the beginning of it was that you were friends and supporters in some ways, that you buoyed each other. That's Absolutely. A really beautiful, Absolutely. A beautiful gift that an actor can give to another. Was there a moment that you remember that just sort of seared on your heart that belongs to the two of you and your sort of history as husband and wife?
Yeah, there's we had this gorgeous set designed and built by Michael Ganio for that 2012 production, directed by Laird Williamson. And it was set in Alta, California in the 1840s. And so it was that beautiful kind of like back, a mix of like brick and stucco and like old wood, just, you know, very, very like rich sunburnt textures. And it actually was like also very stylized, because it was a curved back wall that went upwards towards the edges. And we did the balcony scene at the highest point at one edge of the stage to be able to get like the most distance as we possibly could. And Alejandro and I had come up with a moment. Obviously, we can't be the first Romeo and Juliet to have done this, but to us, it came out of like our actual idea of what if in the middle of it, where there are no words and they're saying goodbye, there is a very silly attempt to try to touch fingers, anything they can. And from her kind of craning her body over the edge of the stage to reach down to try to grab my hand, and me reaching up as high as I could, we were like a foot apart. But just in that attempt, that we were able to find those like perfect, no words, no dialogue moments that it perfectly encapsulates the spirit of a scene. That's where it was, that tension of they're so close, but they can't, which really speaks to the whole play of they're doomed to begin with. It is impossible. They're like two same magnets. They can't, they want to, and as hard as you force them, they can't. They will always be doomed, you know. And you can definitely attest to this with classical theater or classical pieces, to find those moments where you can still find moments of spontaneity and humanity is so special.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears again, and just, can we talk about Edgar? Okay, so you played this, you did this live at the St. Louis Shakespeare Festival, yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Recently, right before you did it for us at Next Chapter Podcasts. Was this a role that you wanted to play? Is King Lear one of your favorites?
King Lear is definitely one of my favorites. King Lear, if I had to pick one that earns the title of like most tragic tragedy, I would say it's Lear. It's for sure of the high tragedy. Like, he is just a sadist to these characters in a very, very beautiful way. But just there, you know, and there are no real heroes. There are just some people doing their best. And Edgar is one of those people. Funnily enough, more than anyone, I wanted to play Edmund.
I wondered about that.
Yes, I've been wanting to play Edmund for forever. A singular kind of villain. A lot of people compare him to Iago, but he's not even that simple. He's even a little bit more ambiguous. Are we supposed to root for him? Are we not? I do. I don't. Then I immediately feel, want him to stop doing the things that he's doing. It's so complicated. And, he says stand up for bastards. And I feel like the audience in a way, yeah, absolutely. These, at the beginning of that play, we should feel like some of the characters that he wants to do bad to deserve it.
Well, my legitimate brother, if this letter does the trick and I succeed, Edmund the bastard will topple the legitimate. I'll grow. I'll prosper. Now, gods, stand up for the bastards of the world!
I love Edmund. I love that character, and so much of his, he's in that camp of like those Tybalt characters that have just incredible, mustache twirly one-liners, but that are just like so badass if they're done right. They're great.
Yes. A gullible father and a noble brother whose nature is so far from vice that he wouldn't know evil if it grew horns, a tail, and was reared in hell. My plot will dig their graves. This is way too easy.
But that was really my in. And Edgar, I was like, cool. Good luck to anyone who tries doing it. Not for me. Thank you very much. It's just so incredibly daunting.
It is. It's one of the hardest, I think. I think it's the hardest role in the play besides Lear. I think it's the hardest role in the play. It's a tough one, but you do it so beautifully.
I mean, in performance, it's hard. Vocally, it's hard to, first of all, even decide what you want to do with it, what it is, why. And then it's incredibly hard physically doing it in an actual play. So there are so many things, really like homework that like old school, get a black box, like little studio to yourself as an actor and like experiment, silly voices, like all of that kind of stuff. You really have to create so much as Edgar. And it's the tricky thing of, okay, well, we know where he gets in the middle point. What's the beginning point? Who is he at the beginning that then informs why he chooses to do what he does in the rest of the play? And it's very hard because also we get very little about that. I think in the play, there are two things that they say about Edgar that as like a starting point that might tell you about him, which I have, Edmund says that he's so oblivious that anyone would ever do wrong to him or trick him that he would never see this coming. So I have to take that as truth also because Edmund is telling the audience, and I don't think he would lie about that. So he's naive. He's blind to any bad happening to him ever, incredibly privileged. And I think there's a side comment that he was like partying with Lear's knights at one point. So it's like, okay. And I think that adds to the thing of maybe he's a little bit of a party boy. Maybe he's again, not someone who's focused. In a lot of ways, he's built, I think, very purposefully as the foil to Edmund from the very beginning, where Edmund, we find that he's able to go incognito and stuff, but inside he's incredibly focused, kind of slow burn rage, wanting this revenge. And if Edmund is the opposite of that, then that's who Edgar is the opposite of that, then that's who he is. So then it's the thing of figuring out why he chooses the things that he does, the things that he does to be able to get away, is very strange.
Would you mind telling us what your reasons are, like why he goes in this direction? And again, the father-son, this is a big father-son role.
Yeah.
So can you describe like your journey to for Edgar?
Yeah, it's so I think that if he starts in that way, I don't think that he necessarily has the strongest connection to Gloucester. He is his actual son, not bastard or whatever. So I think that he is immediately status-wise a little bit above Edmund for sure. But I think that privilege is a little bit of what makes him decide, well, I must undo myself. What is the opposite of myself? I will completely destroy my status. I will blend. I mean, I think that directors can also go, he sees one of the, people down on their luck, one of the homeless around him or whatever, and has the idea comes from that. But my bigger point of why I think Poor Tom exists in the play is that privilege, that ableism of being like, oh, I can become, one of these sad people, and pretends to be mad, pretends to be mentally ill, that then runs into King Lear, actually going through these hardships within his own mind, is one of the, if done right, like cruelest, most tragic bits of dramatic irony ever. Of he has to, through his own selfish, I think, preservation, pretend to be Poor Tom, only exacerbates King Lear's madness. He only encourages Lear to go further down that spiral that he's going. And that's very fun to play in real time. Of that's not what he means to be doing, but he can't out himself he can't just stop. I think he chooses Poor Tom. It's that idea, well, I'm going to repel any eyes that might look towards me, so I will be as foul, as maybe violent, as hostile, as incendiary, as upsetting as I can possibly be, visually, to smell, to ear, to, so that hopefully anyone who sees me doesn't want to engage. That's all Lear wants to do with Poor Tom, is talk to him more and more. And it's there's so much there that it's hard to explain. When you see the words on paper, reading, I think it's one of those things where you read it, it doesn't quite click. When you perform it and see it performed, you see what Shakespeare is doing there, specifically within the relationship of when Poor Tom meets with Lear. Why Poor Tom? I think it serves as that. And I think it goes to the bigger thing of what I think Edgar's entire journey is: learning to involve himself in things that are bigger than just his own dangers.
Oh, yes.
His realization of the country, the entire kingdom, is in danger as well. I mean, and then the micro of his father, I must protect him, but it's externalizing, getting out of, I have to save myself because I'm a fugitive, into I have to help others as well. I really think that that's his journey in the play, is what it's felt like to me.
And so what was it like then working on Marcus's translation?
Really, really, really fantastic. In terms of what I was talking to before, just a huge punch in the gut in a really good way of helping me with that story of Poor Tom. We can understand in the macro of Shakespeare world of, yes, the homeless, the forgotten, the mentally ill, I'm forgetting the language now, but it's like the poor and misshapen that Lear finally is able to see for the first time as well. We don't know what in ancient Britain they might be, but we can understand what it's like in that social struggle in San Francisco at that time, in the midst of her coming out of Vietnam or anything. All of that social upheaval and the people that are pushed aside, that we can visualize, we can identify. Those people have names. So any time that we're able to take those larger ideas of the poor and forgotten, the disenfranchised, and contextualize them in a way that our audience today understands it, is the point of it, the point of these plays now. And he's done that so beautifully and seamless here, injecting his own personality into it while 100% keeping the spirit of what I think Shakespeare was going for.
This might be a good time to sort of do the side by side. So I asked Dan to bring in two pieces, one from Shakespeare and one from Marcus Gardley's, a little piece of text to sort of read first to Shakespeare and then Marcus Gardley's, and then to talk about what the differences are.
I heard myself proclaimed, and by the happy hollow of a tree escaped the hunt. No port is free. No place that guard and most unusual vigilance does not attend my taking. Whiles I may scape, I will preserve myself. And then bethought to take the basest and most poorest shape that ever penury and contempt of man brought near to beast. My face I'll grime with filth, blanket my loins, elf all my hair in knots, and with presented nakedness outface the winds and persecutions of the sky. The country gives me proof and precedent of bedlam beggars who, with roaring voices, strike in their numbed and mortified bare arms pins, wooden pricks, nails, sprigs of rosemary, and with this horrible object from low farms, poor pelting villages, sheep cots and mills, sometimes with lunatic bands, sometimes with prayers, enforce their charity. Poor Turley God, poor Tom, that's something yet. Edgar, I nothing am.
Excellent. Thank you. It is those words, man. So beautiful. Okay, let's hear Marcus Gardley.
Absolutely. Pull it up here. Edgar, I no longer am. I heard them proclaim me to be an outlaw, and I was lucky to escape those hunting me by hiding behind the trunk of a tree. There is no port or road that is not heavily guarded with eyes looking to capture me. I plan to take on a dirty disguise. I'll be the filthiest, lowliest beggar that poverty ever inflicted on a man. I'll smear my face with filth, wear a loincloth, make my hair tangled into knots, and half naked will I confront both wind and rain. I've seen this city mad beggars who with roaring voices stick pins, spikes, nails, and sprigs of rosemary into their bare arms. Poor Tom, the vagabond. Bum, derelict, transient, hobo Joe. But what do they call themselves? Oh yes, I will make quite the beggar. Therefore, Edgar, I no longer am. I am now Tom. Poor Tom. Tom, I am.
Wow. That's beautiful. It's really great to hear them side by side. They both have such power. They both have such power. Can you talk about the difference for you? You spoke about it a little bit, but can you talk about the difference for you just reading them side by side?
Just reading them side by side, I am almost, I don't know if it contradicted what I was saying earlier, but no, I actually think it enforces it. If I think that Marcus's Edgar is at least a little bit more conscious of the sensitivity of trying to do it, is still going to go through with it because it's the best idea he has in that moment to save himself. But he's almost a little bit more of there's a little bit more of an empathy there. He's a little bit more of a method actor in Marcus's of needing to, he at least identifies of like, I love that passage where he goes, derelict, hobo Joe. But these are all the things that we throw on
them.
People, how we stigmatize them. But that's not what they call themselves. Therefore, I can't think of it that way. I can't think that my character is that because it is almost a little bit more of like, it's funny. It's like maybe he's taken like a couple acting classes or something. But while in Shakespeare's, it's very much more of like the outside in. It's almost, at least in the reading it too, of how Shakespeare's thoughts keep rolling on and on and on. He needs to embody it on the outside first before it comes in. And he actually isn't given a chance to kind of get his breath to figure out how to get into character. Mm-hmm. He just immediately goes into, the head and the face. And it's so many commas went after it. There's no real moment where he can kind of stop and really think about the plan, which is, I think, another key thing of people are, why poor Tom? And I tell him, he just thinks of it and does it. And there's no time to kind of think of anything else. But that, it is, and not to say that in Shakespeare there's no moment of empathy, because I think he can actually, when he talks about these the bedlam beggars, striking in their arms, the pins and the wooden pricks, which in another context too, in terms of drug abuse, so there's no other way to kind of not think about that as a modern audience, I think, but that he does know that these people are in pain. But there's something about Marcus's of him needing to know that he needs to remember, no, they are human. What do they call themselves before I try to become one of them?
Yeah, it seems as if Marcus, in some way, the empathy was really important to Marcus, and he shaped his sentence to emphasize it, and gave that. What's that little phrase he says? What did they call it about beggar? Right before there, right there.
They stick pins, spikes, nails, and sprigs of rosemary into their bare arms. Poor Tom, the vagabond, bum, derelict, transient, hobo Joe. But what do they call themselves? Oh, yes, I will make quite the beggar. So it's this little hitch moment.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Oh, yes.
That's really, 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 yeah. It's somehow adding in a little moment of existentialism that Shakespeare might have missed in that moment, in a play that is very much all about our existence. And
and even if it's in the Shakespeare, Marcus directs us to it in some ways. That's what he emphasizes. I think what happens in the Shakespeare goes by so quick, and Marcus allows us to sit with it for just a second.
Which in playing Edgar is very much appreciated, because another thing that I have felt in playing him is he's you actually don't get to freak out too much on how to play the character, because he's so plot driven. Things are happening to him. He can only react so many. There are only a couple moments where he comes out and actually has a moment with the audience to catch them up on where he is mentally and in the story. He doesn't get a whole lot of time to think. So it's such a gift to even have in that moment, which I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's in contradiction to what Shakespeare wrote. It's very much alive in it, but so useful for us to, again, any hints of who Edgar is before he starts shape shifting is really, really wonderful.
What's the difference between doing an audio production and a live production?
It's that thing where you have like one thing taken away, but that only kind of enhances your focus. Like, I can only think of, like, the Daredevil or something. Like I lost my sight, but that means that all the other senses became enhanced.
Right.
I'm not able to express through, I can't tell a story through my face or my body. And I only have the voice. So at moments, and especially of course with Poor Tom and other stuff, is trying to find what are other muscles that we can have, other tricks that we can do within communicating with the other person in the scene to really lift the story, but without taking us out of the world that contextually Marcus has like put us in. And then at the same time too, it would be a lie if we don't say that it's daunting, because Shakespeare, already we hear it all, it's such an auditory experience to sit in his through his plays. So then as actors, we're always so worried about, is the emphasis, is this that, or that there can be quite a bit of second guessing. But more than anything, I felt like what helped me the most was like really unlocking the listening, really getting back to like, don't worry about how I am being recorded in this moment. They will let me know if a take is unusable. And if you guys never call me back to do another one, then that's the way it would. But in this moment, it would be a disservice to not try to connect with Bernie in those moments, to not try to connect with Keith as the king, because that is a story. Once it becomes back-footed and like I was saying before, oratory, that what I, blah, 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 your line, and then now I speak
right.
the most beautiful or whatever way that I want to do. Once I try to do my thing, if it loses the immediacy, then it becomes the Shakespeare that everyone makes fun of. And I, as soon as I felt like I was like, I'm doing that thing, connect and try. And in the magic of it, secondarily, we will get hopefully the takes that we're, and we will get that story. So it was trusting in everyone else, which was very easy because everyone was so freaking talented in the rooms that we had. and trusting that the story will be told without the other things, because I'd listened to the other play on. I had done the Macbeth one, and
Yes.
very happy to have done that. And I was blown away by how much story was translated into my AirPods, where in taping, I'm like, is this contextually, are we getting that this is here now and that time has passed, or whatever the reason might be? Wonderfully surprised at how much it did translate.
Come, go we to the king. Our army is ready. Our lack is nothing but our leave. Macbeth is ripe for shaking, and the powers above put on their instruments. Receive what cheer you may. His night is long that never sees the day.
It's come through, and from what I've listened on just the very first episode, it definitely has. I'm so happy to have heard the episode.
Well, I do want to say, I want to mention, of course, the sound design is done by Lindsay Jones and was directed by ERIC TING. And without those two people, the context doesn't exist. And Marcus, of course, who sets it. But with those great designers and directors, we're able to put the world together. But it is, I love hearing that, Dan, that actually you did what our tagline is, which is look with your ears.
For the best listening experience, be sure to use headphones or earbuds. Just look with your ears.
That was your task, and as an actor in the podcast, that you were looking with your ears. Right. I really, really appreciate that you spent this hour with me, Dan. It's always so good to talk with you.
Always a pleasure. Absolutely.
And I should also say, yes, please go back and listen to Macbeth. Dan played Malcolm in our first Play On podcast series, Macbeth. And you please continue listening you will hear him more and more as the episodes go on as Edgar in King Lear. And of course, Edgar turns into Poor Tom. And we have been delighted to have you on this series, Dan. Truly, you are so good at looking with your ears. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. A real pleasure.
Poor Tom, the vagabond, bum, derelict, transient, hobo Joe. But what do they call themselves? Yes, I will make quite the beggar. Therefore, Edgar, I no longer am. I am now Tom. Poor Tom. Tom, I am.
You've been listening to the Play On Podcast bonus content series. You can learn more about the Play On Podcasts at Next Chapter Podcast website, ncpodcasts.com. That's N as in next, C as in chapter podcasts with an S at the end.com, where you can find other Play On podcast series and interviews, along with talk podcasts like The 500, The 10, The Tough Juice podcast with Karan Butler, and a whole lot more. I'd like to thank Jeremiah Tittle, the founder of Next Chapter Podcasts, and my producer, Peter Musto. Our audio engineer is Adam Bernard, and our editor and sound designer is Justin Cortez. Be sure to subscribe to Next Chapter Podcasts for updates on all the latest content, and don't forget to rate and review our shows. I'm Miriam Lauba, and I look forward to sharing more incredible works in the Play On Podcast series with you, along with lots of enlightening bonus content at Next Chapter Podcasts.